Hey everyone, David Aragona here, taking a look at the first of four stakes races that will be run on Saturday at Belmont at the Beaugay. Race 2 on their 11 race card is the Grade 3 Beaugay, this one going 1.16 miles on the outer turf course for fillies and mares. While there are 8 entered for this race, note that the 3 towards the outside are all main track only entrants, so only 5 entered for turf, a relatively small field, and in these situations, never a surprise when Chad Brown has 2 of the entrants, including 2 of the morning line favorites, those being the number 5 White Beam and the number 4 Esprit, who I did list as even money and 7-5 respectively on the morning line. They are likely to attract most of the support in this race. A couple others have some stakes credentials. The number 1 Quarrel, probably a big price in this race, but I still think some interesting things to talk about despite the small field size for this Beaugay. Before we get into the contenders, let's take a look at the Timeform US pace projector for this field, and no blue bar showing up indicating it's a favors on or near the lead situation, but it doesn't feel like there's very much pace in this race. The number 1 Quarrel, she is a natural front runner who probably will be sent forward from her rail post position. That's probably her best chance in this race. The number 5 White Beam, though, she's a more difficult one to assess with regard to how this pace might play out. She was pressing the pace last time in the Matriarch, but that didn't really work out for her. She's been a little headstrong and aggressive in her last few starts, whereas she was more of a mid-pack runner when she first came to Chad Brown's barn earlier last year. And given that she had more success with that style, I wonder if we'll try to take her a little bit further off the pace than what this pace projector indicates. The number 3 Spirit and Glory, I should also mention, she did go gate to wire in her most recent start, but she is really more of a closing type naturally, and she just took advantage of a situation where there was really no speed signed on in her last race. So definitely a murky pace situation, but personally, I would expect the number 1 Quarrel to be setting the pace in this spot. Let's begin with Quarrel as we go through the contenders in this race. She's drawn on the rail, and she's coming back off the layoff here. Her connections probably did not have this race as her first choice for a comeback. They actually entered her early in the week at Aqueduct in an allowance race, but given how small this field was coming up, I'm sure there was a call from the racing office to try to make this race go, and she's going to wind up in this field. She did run pretty well last summer at Saratoga when she went gate to wire in that first level allowance race, getting a solid 1:08 Timeform US speed figure, and you could argue that she didn't get the best setups in her last couple of starts against Stakes Company. You see all of those red colored coded pace figures for the Jockey Club Oaks as well as the Sands Point, and she was the one chasing leaders that were just going too fast on each occasion in those races, so no surprise that she got tired towards the end. She still hasn't shown herself to be grade 3 quality just yet, but she is making her first start as a 4-year-old, and you could argue that she does have some upside coming back off the layoff. The number 2 is Nisi Marie, and we'll take a look at the Sands Point. Quarrel was also in this race, but Nisi Marie is the one that ran particularly well, getting up for second over this boggy, yielding course. You could see this race just run during a downpour as there's rain falling, and they're kicking up quite a bit of clods from the turf course on this day. And I thought Nisi Marie ran really well, arguably the best race of anybody, since she made an early move to go 3 wide around the far turn without cover, whereas the eventual winner of this race, Eternal Hope, got a slightly better trip than she did, saving a little more ground, and is able to outgame her to the finish line. But Eternal Hope had some form over less than firm turf, whereas Nisi Marie, probably not her best situation that day, but she still ran very well. She also put in a good effort behind that same rival in the Jockey Club Oaks just prior to that. I'm not sure that 1 3/8 is really this one's best distance, but this filly just tries hard every time. Even last time in the Mrs. Revere, dirt is definitely not her preferred surface, but she was really trying at the end of that race, trying to run after second behind a runaway winner. Now she's coming back off the layoff to make her 4-year-old debut. Her trainer, Butch Reed, can certainly have one ready to go, and I like this rider upgrade to Joel Rosario. Nothing against her prior jockey in some of those turf races, but not a jockey that has as much success on the turf as Joel Rosario does, and I think it's really interesting that Butch Reed is reaching out to this kind of jock to begin her 4-year-old campaign. She's an interesting contender at what's likely to be a better price in this Beaugay. The number 3 is Spirit and Glory, and we'll take a look at her most recent start. I was mentioning during the pace projector, she led every step of the way in this Plenty of Grace Stakes and really was not a competitive affair. A couple of the Chad Brown runners returning from layoffs in this race just did not seem ready to go, maybe were not in the top form that they had achieved in the past, and it just created a situation where Spirit and Glory was too good for this field, getting a perfect trip, and she's just able to sprint this final quarter mile in 22 3/5 seconds. No chance anybody was going to catch her in that situation. You see the blue color coded pace figures for that last race, really indicating that she did have everything go her own way. She won from off the pace when she came back from the layoff in February at Fairgrounds. That was a good effort. She regressed in her next start at that same venue, not getting as perfect a trip as she did back in February. And you wonder if she can put these top efforts back to back, because going back through her form, she hasn't always been the most consistent type. She can be a little bit up and down, but she is coming off a good effort, and her tactical speed should play well in this field. The number 4 is Asprey, and we'll take a look at her last race, going all the way back to August at Saratoga when she won the Lake Placid Stakes over one of her stablemates, Surge Capacity, and that rival certainly did well coming out of this race. She went on to win a couple of stakes races, including the Grade 1 Matriarch at the end of the year, certainly flattering the form of this Lake Placid. And you could see Asprey beats that stablemate pretty resoundingly here. She draws off to win this race by 2 lengths. This was her 4th victory. She's now 4 for 5 in her career, 3 for 4 on the turf. Her only loss came when they tried to go 10 furlongs with her in the Belmont Oaks. That was also a big step up in class for this filly, and maybe it was just a little bit too much for her at that point in her career. But her last race was strong. The only problem is she went to the sidelines thereafter, and that was August. There was plenty of turf racing left in the 2023 season, and we didn't see her again. So she definitely had some kind of setback. Now she's coming off an extended layoff. Chad Brown does well off layoffs in basically all situations, especially in turf routes. So typically that's not a big concern, and she is coming back in a graded stakes race. So those are all good signs. Interesting that Flavien Prat lands on this one, since he had been the regular rider of both Asprey and White Beam, who we'll take a look at now. And this is White Beam finishing 4th in the Matriarch, her most recent start. She actually finished behind 3 of her Chad Brown stablemates here, as Chad Brown sent out the superfecta in this Matriarch Stakes. White Beam was actually the one that went off the favorite at 9-5, but you could see just can't quite finish this race off after taking the lead in upper stretch at Del Mar. And she's just had some trouble finishing her last couple of races. That was the case 2 back in the First Lady, when she just seemed kind of tough for Flavien Prat to handle. She was a little rank and keen, racing in the pocket, just never really settling the way that you'd want her to see, the way that she did in some of her races earlier in the year. And I think that really detracted from the finish that you would have expected she might produce that day. Similar thing in the Matriarch last time, where she settled better, but was a little more forward than you might have expected. I'll be interested to see how Irad Ortiz rides her, getting back on board. He did pilot her to victory in the Gallaret Stakes last year around this same time, and now he's getting back on board off the layoff. Interested that Chad Brown enters her in this race, since he did start, I believe, 4 horses in the Jenny Wiley, a Grade 1 race at Keeneland. She was selected for this easier spot. Don't know how much we're supposed to read into that, but just something to note with this horse that could go favored for that barn. But let's throw up my picks for this Beaugay, and just a little skeptical of both Chad Brown horses at what could be very short prices. Asprey with the layoff to deal with, missing the rest of the 2023 season, and White Beam tailing off at the end of 2023. So that leads me to put the number 2, Nisi Marie, on top. She obviously has to improve, but she's the kind of horse that has a license to improve, making her first start as a 4-year-old after really achieving her best form at the end of her 2023 season when she was a 3-year-old. Getting the rider upgrade to Joel Rosario, I think, are all positives for the number 2, Nisi Marie, who I've listed at 8-1 on the morning line in the Grade 3 Beaugay on Saturday at Belmont at the Big A. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.